Welcome to a HoN hero tier list video. In this segment, I will be ranking all of the heroes in the game whose best role is solo, mid, or 1 versus 1 into a tier list. As we rank each hero, I will be giving my explanations for why I have placed each hero in their specified tier. So let's go ahead and get started here. Our first hero on the list is going to be Gauntlet. And for me, Gauntlet is a D tier solo mid hero. And the reason why I rank him so low on the tier list is that he doesn't really scale all that well into the game. He can't really rotate into the jungle and farm stacks. He's not exceptional at rune control. He's primarily just good in the laning phase and roaming around and setting up kills. So for me, he has too many weaknesses that I can't really rate him in the higher tier. So I'm going to place him there in the D tier. Our next hero on the list here is going to be Electrician. Electrician for me is an A tier solo mid hero. This hero, on the other hand, is great in 1 versus 1 matchups, exceptional. Also fairly decent against range heroes, being able to close the gap with his grip. He can flash farm, push out waves, get runes. He can even rotate and kill jungle stacks with his shield and his energy absorption. And he has a very strong ultimate with his purge, which is good throughout all phases of the game. Even being able to remove stuff like sheep sticks and whatnot. Fantastic initiator, very hard to deal with because he gets very tanky, deals lots of damage, and you can't really ignore him. So just a fantastic hero from start to finish. Next hero here on the tier list is going to be Defiler. Defiler for me is an S tier solo mid hero. So our first S tier hero on the list. And what is it that makes Defiler so good, and why do we rate her so high? So she's a fantastic laner. She can kill creep waves and farm very fast with her wave. She is very difficult to gank and kill with her Siphon Soul, being able to not only slow her opponent, but heal herself up and give her movement speed. So she is great in the laning phase. She is great at scaling with her ultimate, pushing towers. She can always rotate and kill stacks with her wave, which has a 5-second cooldown. And she can crowd control in teamfights with her silence. So this hero just has a lot going for her. Her one biggest weakness is maybe that she can get ganked fairly easily, but not so much with her Siphon Soul. So for me, our first S tier hero on the list. Next on the list is going to be Blacksmith, and Blacksmith for me is yet again another A tier solo mid hero. So you might be thinking, Blacksmith isn't a hero that we really see a whole lot. We actually do. He has become very prominent, I guess in the last year or maybe 2, with not only the fact that he can multicast, but his frenzy makes him very, very strong in the laning phase and throughout all stages of the game. He's really, really difficult to lane against. This hero doesn't necessarily need any items to do well. As long as he's getting multicast, he's effective. And then when you throw some items on top of him, like Staff of the Master, anything that bulks up his spell damage, anything that gives him mobility or positioning, this hero becomes a menace. He is so difficult to deal with sometimes, and he can just take over games with pure RNG. So lanes really well, scales throughout the game. The only weakness I would say is he really can't flash farm well, but for me, that's not going to bring him down too much in the tier list. We're going to give him an A. Next on the list is going to be Torturer. Torturer, for me, I'm going to also put him in the A tier. This is a hero that lanes very well, can flash farm very well, has lots of AoE. He can do very well in his lane with different skill builds. He can go bonds or impalement. You typically always want to get the stun. Sometimes you want to level it up, sometimes you want to keep it low level, but Torture is a very good 1 versus 1 hero. Again, his biggest weakness is that he can kind of get ganked easily, but you almost can't really shut down a Torturer too much. And if he's able to farm, he just naturally starts to build tankier, and he can deal lots of damage throughout the course of the game. The next on our tier list here is going to be Arachna. Arachna for me, I'm going to place Arachna in the B tier. Definitely belongs in the upper half of the tier list. This is a hero that throughout HoN's history has always been one of the best laners, if not the best laner. For a while, considered to be a lane dominator with her web shot. She can orb block, doesn't take creep aggro. Can be very difficult to lane against, especially if you're a melee. Sometimes you can't walk up and get last hits. But with that being said, that is kind of Arachna's biggest thing she has going for her. Because a lot of what she does, she has lots of counterplay. You can always TP away from her. Easy to gank, doesn't have an escape. She does become decent with the Staff of the Master nowadays, but there was a period of time where just Arachna didn't see a lot of competitive play. Nowadays we see her occasionally. So she definitely belongs in the upper half, but I can't unfortunately place her higher than a B because I think she just has a lot of things, or a lot of weaknesses, unfortunately, outside of being such a dominant force in the laning phase. Next on our list is Hellbringer. Hellbringer, for me, I'm going to place him in the C tier. So our first C tier solo mid hero. Personally, I like Hellbringer quite a lot, but I feel like nowadays there are just a lot of more powerful laners. The biggest thing Hellbringer has going for him is when he's able to get to a Restoration Stone. When he gets to a Restoration Stone, this hero can turn games single-handedly. But up until then, he's kind of easy to shut down, kind of easy to outrune control. He doesn't really farm the fastest. He needs to use a lot of his mana to farm. He's not the fastest farmer, but he's definitely an amazing team fighter, one of the best in the game. Situationally very good against channeling types of heroes. He's amazing, and he's great for providing lockdown once he gets a Staff of the Master, or as said earlier, that Restoration Stone. But for me, I'm going to place him in the C tier. Next on the list is going to be Pyromancer. Pyromancer for me is very similar to Hellbringer. I'm going to put him in the C tier. Pyromancer lanes very well, but he kind of just falls off, so to speak. He's really easy to shut down, really easy to outrune control. Definitely this hero can flash farm a lot better than a Hellbringer or an Arachna, but Pyromancer, it's very hard for him to take over games often, and a lot of the times he's almost kind of transitioned into a support more than a solo mid, but a solo mid is not that bad. Definitely very good against melee heroes, being able to spam his Phoenix Wave and whatnot, and provides lots of burst. But for me, I put him in the C tier. Next on the list is Bubbles. Bubbles for me is another B tier mid hero. So Bubbles, he's not the strongest laner. Definitely not comparable to Arachna in the sense of his lane presence, but he is able to split push throughout the game, be a nuisance. He ganks very effectively. He doesn't really need any items to do ganks. As soon as he hits level 6, he can set up ganks anywhere. So in competitive games, he's a very viable and solid option because he can gank tri-lanes very effectively early on with his Kelp field. He can overlevel the supports and burst them down with his Shell Surf Song of the Sea combo. And he's fairly good at rune control with his high mobility. Once he gets a portal key and whatnot, he can be very, very difficult to kill if you don't have the right heroes against him. So sometimes he's just very slippery, a big menace. Like I said, he split pushes throughout the game, builds into big items like sheepsticks and health flowers, and then he becomes a valuable asset even throughout the late game, where the Kelp field starts to be countered by shrunken heads. So fairly good hero, not the best laner, thus we're going to put him in the B tier. If he was a better laner, definitely he could see some A tier action, but gonna have to put him in the B tier. So next is Bloodhunter. Bloodhunter for me is a E tier solo mid hero. Bloodhunter hasn't really been the strongest hero for a long time. He's good at locking one guy down, but it's kind of like a worse Arachna. You can just TP away from him. He's forced to buying items like Tablet of Command to kind of counter and make use of his hemorrhage. But a lot of the times you can just bulk up and man fight him or build magic armor, be able to combat him, and he's not really all that threatening. So there's a lot of ways to deal with Bloodhunter. He's more of a niche pick against really high mobility heroes, and if he's not against those kinds of heroes, he doesn't really serve a great purpose other than just being a kind of mediocre ganker with single target spells. So in competitive games, it's really easy to play against this hero, thus we don't really see him hardly at all. And unfortunately, I can't really rate him too highly. Next on the list is going to be Thunderbringer, and Thunderbringer for me is a D tier solo mid hero. He is okay, but he's very easy to lane against. You just don't stand near the creeps when he chain lightnings. Has no auto attack presence. All his presence is through his spells. He doesn't really clear creep waves well. He doesn't really rune control well. He doesn't really lane versus anything specifically well. He just kind of deals a lot of damage naturally with his ultimate. And until he gets the Grimoire of Power, he's kind of just lackluster. He's really easy to gank and kill over and over. Almost always has top hero damage, but that doesn't always necessarily net him a win. So also, since he got the Restoration Stone nerf to him specifically, where you cannot use ulti resto ulti anymore within 10 seconds, that really hurt the hero as well. So before that, he maybe was like a C tier hero because the Grimoire made him really powerful, but I think now he's kind of fallen down into a D tier, and I unfortunately can't rate him too much higher than that. Next on our list is going to be Tremble. Tremble for me is an A tier hero in solo 1 versus 1. So Tremble, he has the ability to destroy trees in the beginning of the game, which makes laning against him in the first couple of minutes very difficult. You can't run back to eat trees as easily. He hides in his mounts. He's very slippery. He can shove out waves with his Dark Swarm. He can port around to his mounts to even get runes or to gank side lanes once he gets some levels going for him. He scales incredibly well. He has lockdown for himself with his Ensnare. Able to farm jungle camps. It's just his high mobility makes him a threat at all phases of the game. That and his scaling power, his gank presence with teammates. Just a really scary hero to face in the right hands. I think he cannot be an S tier hero because there are many ways to play around him and kind of predict his play patterns, but still a very, very powerful hero. Next on the list is Kraken. Kraken for me is our second S tier hero. This hero is a monster, like literally. He's a sea creature monster. So what makes Kraken such a monster? Well, he farms incredibly well. He's able to push out creep waves with just his splash, so he doesn't need to use mana, just has to keep attacking and killing creeps. So he's able to rune control fairly effectively. He has a stun, a slow, a ultimate that restrains and immobilizes through, or I think just the restrain goes through magic immunity. He scales throughout all stages of the game. He's basically like a one-man solo killer against enemy carries. He scales well as like a semi-core with items like Demonic Breastplate and whatnot. You can become a right-clicker with physical damage. This hero is just good at just about everything, except maybe laning against some strong ranged heroes that can kind of nuke him out of the lane. But other than that, this hero just does well at all phases of the game. He can even sometimes go 1 versus 2 if he has to. Not always the best role for him, but very, very good in 1 versus 1. Next on the list is going to be Gravekeeper. And Gravekeeper for me is our second E tier hero. So I might be a little harsher to Gravekeeper. He is a fairly good 1 versus 1 hero specifically. I feel like he had a period of time in HoN where he was one of the better tier or the better solo heroes, but we just never see this hero in competitive play. There's just almost always better options at what he does, which is kind of ganking or even pushing towers with his ultimate. He can farm moderately well, but not amazingly well. He kind of does need a lot of mana early game, as well as he needs items like Portal Key to kind of position himself. But he is very easy to kill, has hardly any mobility. It's very important for him to win his lane, to get rune control, and to kind of snowball games. If that doesn't happen, it's really hard for Gravekeeper to kind of make his presence felt in the game. So for me, I'm gonna put him in the E tier, unfortunately for Mr. Gravekeeper. Next on our list is going to be Gladiator. Gladiator for me is our third S tier solo mid hero. And what makes Gladiator an S tier hero? Well, if you've ever laned against this hero, he just kind of slowly beats you down. Literally, he has Whip or Flagellation, which every so many seconds he whips you, he whips the creeps, you take true damage. Doesn't matter if you have armor, he just keeps whipping you. He doesn't have a lot of burst damage, but he has lockdown. It's very easy to set up ganks with the Gladiator. Either you receiving the ganks or you setting up the ganks yourself. You can TP around and showdown people into Pitfall and throw out your call to arms. Set up ganks in the post laning phase stage, but in the laning phase, he's just so annoying to deal with. Whether you're a melee or a ranged hero, it feels like he just kind of beats you down over time. Not only that, but he scales very well into the game. So he can farm with his Pitfall and his Whip, just kiting creep camps with Whip, pushing out creep waves in mid lane, getting rune control. Zero is just very, very difficult to deal with at times. So he does a lot of things very, very well. Next on the list here is Shellshock, and Shellshock for me is another E tier solo mid hero. So Shellshock, he has some places where he can be good. Whenever he's against heroes that throw projectiles at him, he can avoid those by rolling at his opponent while the projectile flies at him, so he can disjoint stuff. He's really good at spamming out creep waves in the laning phase and being annoying, just constantly harassing with his fireflies. But the role is kind of hard to make use of a lot of the time. And his scaling, it's okay, but it's not amazing. His ganking is really hard because it's not like an instant mechanic. You have to slowly charge at people and they could get the distance to safety or blink away or do things to kind of counterplay the Shellshock. So it's kind of easy to play against him, and it's hard for him to have a whole lot of impact. We really don't see this hero too much in competitive because there's just better initiators, more reliable heroes. Unfortunately for me, Shellshock has to get the E rank. Next on the tier list is Hag. Wretched Hag going to be another S tier solo mid hero. So Wretched Hag, unlike maybe some of the other heroes on the list, she does have quite a lot of matchups where she's maybe not favored. But against melee heroes specifically, she just dominates 1 versus 1 matchups by spamming Haunt on them and Sonar Scream, pushing them off the creeps, and with her high mobility with Blink, she's always able to rune control very effectively. So she can lane very well in a lot of situations. Not all, but a lot. She gets rune control. She can stack the jungle for herself and clear jungle stacks very efficiently because Sonar Scream has a pretty low cooldown. And on top of that, this hero scales incredibly well because her ultimate, Bat Blast, has superior magic damage. So an AoE superior magic damage ultimate that scales throughout the game. You get items like Staff and Grimoire on this hero, and she just melts the opponent. It doesn't matter if they have shrunken heads, they need to build magic armor to get resistance from her. But it's very hard to deal with Wretched Hag, very hard to shut her down. This hero can just flash farm, scale, lane well. It's an amazing hero. So she will definitely be qualified for the S tier. Next on our list is Kane, and we have to go back to the opposite end of the spectrum and place Kane in the E tier. So Kane, he is a pretty good laner, just like some other heroes in this list, like Gravekeeper. He lanes very well. He can solo kill people when he hits level 6. He can do well against melee heroes, hitting his waylay. He's able to sustain himself with his passive. I forget the name of it at the moment. But he's more of like a single target anti-carry style of mid. He's not like this ganker that just kind of shuts down everybody or whatnot, or snowballs. And he's kind of easy to counter. Get one Storm Spirit, storm the guy that he is ultimating, and this hero becomes really ineffective. So, unfortunately for me, Kane, he doesn't really see any or hardly any competitive play. And that's going to kind of be the trend for a lot of these D and E tier heroes. But Kane, for me, I have to place him in the E tier. Next on our list is going to be Flux. Flux, for me, I really like this hero. I'm going to place him in the S tier again. So Flux is... This hero is just, he's great at setting up so many team compositions with his ultimate. That's primarily what I think of when I think of Flux. I think of him pulling everybody and setting up combos with other heroes. He is great in competitive games because he just changes the position of everyone on the other team. You cannot counter this hero's ultimate with Nullstone. It still goes through, even if they have that Nullstone. And then if you get a Staff of the Master on him at some point or given to him, he gets a global. So it's global. It automatically pulls everyone. Really, really strong. He lanes really well because he's a ranged strength hero. So he has a lot of HP, he has a lot of harassment and lane presence. He can get outlaned by really high attack ranged nuking mid heroes, but those are very few heroes. He lanes very well against melee heroes. He can just box them out. Semi-carries decently well. Becomes a damage dealer with his second skill. You build him with strength items and he starts to bulk up his magnetic surge. So he's a hero that scales throughout all stages of the game. The only weakness of him is he really can't flash farm, but that's fine because he's primarily looking to teamfight and set up combos. Midas is going to be a B tier solo mid hero as our next one on the list. Midas is really good at split pushing, similar to Bubbles. When I think of Bubbles, I think of Midas. They kind of go hand in hand. They're very slippery heroes. They can nuke out waves from far away and just be safe and do that kind of throughout all stages of the game. They just split push lanes. They could set up ganks with Veiled Rots with one other teammate. They do lots of damage. They can build into sheepsticks and scale into the game. And they're great at rune control. They could even jungle if they really had to, but that's not necessarily what they're usually looking to do. So yeah, for the same reasons I mentioned with Bubbles, Midas for me is a B tier solo mid hero. Next we have Bombardier. Bombardier is a tier hero. If this was a tier list from when 4.0 patch hit, this would have been an S tier for sure, but it's been a while since patch 4.0, several years in fact. Now we are in 2022. Bombardier is a tier solo mid hero. Still a very good mid hero, but the bomb has been significantly nerfed. I say significantly. It's got less cast range at early levels. It's a lot harder for bomb to be a lane dominator and box out people, but he still does lane very well. Has decent attack range still and decent nuking power, able to shove out the waves, get the runes, and kind of control his mid lane matchup. Once you get a Staff of the Master, this hero is insanely valuable. He can just gank with any stun in his team, any disable, setting up airstrikes with teammates. Does so much damage. Being able to throw sticky bombs on initiators and they can blink in and stun people, deal extra damage. Bomb is just, he's almost always going to be useful and have a purpose. Great hero to have in your team, and thus getting him an A tier rank. Parallax, for me, the next one on the list is a D tier solo mid hero. Not really a bad hero by all means. Definitely can scale well and do a lot of damage, But as far as solo mid goes, he's not really a strong laner. He's not really able to push out creep waves fast. If you miss one silence, this hero's kind of a sitting duck. If you're able to survive his combo and turn on him, his big strength comes from his ultimate, so you really just have to play around his Earth Shatter. And it's kind of hard for him to kind of control the mid matchup and get runes, I feel like, very often. A lot of heroes just lane better than him. He does scale very well. He becomes a very good semi carry. But for me, I think we just don't see a whole lot of Parallax in competitive play. There's usually just better options for his role. Next on the list is going to be Deadlift. Deadlift for me is another E tier solo mid hero. Kind of an annoying hero to play against. He can kind of just suck the strength out of you slowly over time. He's really good at pushing towers, but that's kind of the main strength of the hero. He has a pretty nice ultimate in the resurrect mechanic, but in order for him to use that effectively, he kind of needs a shrunken head, because in competitive games, there's always going to be someone saving their stun or their interrupt to stop him from channeling that. It's really hard for him to get successful reses off, and we almost never see this hero running competitive. The times where he's rarely effective is when he's able to get a really early Staff of the Master and just kind of run at you and steal all your strength. But the thing is, in competitive games, it's really hard to execute that, and it's countered by like one Sand Scepter. And as long as you have a sustained damage dealer or some way to deal with Deadlift, he's usually not going to be a problem. So more of a pub stomp hero than a competitively viable hero. And unfortunately, I have to give him a low rank. Next on the list here is going to be Adrenaline. Adrenaline for me is a A tier solo mid hero. So if I had made this video maybe a few months ago before he got a nerf, I think this hero would have been S tier. He's just incredible at almost everything. But he's not as difficult to deal with as he once was. He still has an amazing ultimate. He can hold everybody in place, set up combos similar to a Flux. I don't think he lanes as well as he once did with his nerfs to his Shard Blast and his Rush. But his Shard Blasts are still fairly decent at farming creep waves and jungle camps, which allows him to scale decently well. But his high mobility with his, blanking on the name of the spell, his Rush, I think it's called, his second skill. His high mobility with being a strength hero is what makes him really slippery and hard to deal with. That and the fact that he can tether to you and change your positioning makes him a very valuable hero. He's really good in 1v1 situations. Sometimes 1v2, but usually 1v1 situations. And he scales decently well. He teamfights relatively well. So I have to give him an A tier rank. Next on the list is going to be King Klout. And King Klout for me is another D tier hero. So King Klout, he lanes decently well, even if he's against a ranged hero. He can just throw goblins at them repeatedly. Deals lots of damage, but kind of mana is his main weakness, or his goblin refresh rate is his main weakness. He's not really much of an auto attacker. He pretty much just throws goblins and kites you. And he has this really powerful ultimate, but when he doesn't have his ultimate, he's kind of not all that threatening. So you kind of just need to play around his ultimate. And you're going to do fine against a King Klout. He doesn't really jungle that well, so it's kind of hard for him to flash farm. He kind of needs items, I would say. He needs like Staff of the Master and Resto Stone to really become dangerous. Once he gets to that point, he is a really solid hero. But up until then, he's kind of just not as good as other heroes, I would say. Thus, I have to give him a D tier rank. And another reason why we kind of don't see him picked up all that often in competitive games, but he does have instances where he can be very good. Instances where his Parade of Power specifically is looking to counter kind of something with the fear. And being able to fear enemies multiple times is a very powerful effect. But I still have to give him a D rank, unfortunately. Next on the list is going to be Riptide. And Riptide for me is a C tier solo mid hero. So Riptide, he is a really good hero strictly in the 1 versus 1 matchup. He has high base damage and armor because it's agility. So he's great against auto-attacking heroes specifically. But against nukers, he can kind of struggle sometimes at laning. And if he doesn't control runes, which he can do fairly well because of his wave, I forget what if it's called, tidal wave or whatever it's called. Undertow, I think it's called, actually. He can control runes fairly well. He's very slippery and hard to gank. Doesn't really flash farm that well because he doesn't really have any AoE, so he just has to kind of hit things down one at a time. But he can do that fairly fast because he has all that agility that he gets from his passive. So he lanes very well. He scales decently well, but he has a hard time farming. He's more of a ganking kind of semi-core. That can be good sometimes. He's better, I would say, when he's paired with other carries in the team that can benefit from his ultimate. But more of a kind of like niche mid hero. Wouldn't say he's great in all scenarios, so I have to give him a C rank. Next on the list is Gunblade. Gunblade for me is a D tier solo mid hero. So he's a ganking hero that kind of single target locks down one guy, looks to burst them down with his grappling shot. Kind of easy to counterplay this hero, I would say, with items. Not really a big fan of Gunblade. I feel like he has such a specific niche in locking down heroes with that restrain from the grappling shot. A lot of heroes can just turn and man fight him. And although he's like a decent laner, he doesn't really have any skill that kind of like stands out. He doesn't have like a stun or an amazing slow. It's like a okay slow. And he has a single target ultimate, just kind of like a ganking semi-carry hero. But I feel like there are just better heroes in the game for that role than Gunblade. Thus, I have to give him a D tier rank. Next on the list is Pandemonium, and Panda is going to be another C tier mid hero. This is a hero that lanes extremely well in a 1 versus 1 scenario, but outside the laning phase where he can kind of just jump on you and face smash you and kill you head on, once it comes into mid game and late game, this hero is just really easy to play against. You buy storms and tablets and void talismans, and all of a sudden Panda's really sad. He's got so many obstacles to face. It's just at high tier competitive games, it's really easy to play against the Pandemonium. But if you're able to lane dominate early on, he can kind of snowball and take over games sometimes. So he is situationally very good, but a lot of the times, more often than not, he's really easy to counterplay. So I will give him a C rank. I think he is a fairly solid hero, but a hero that has a lot of weaknesses and things to overcome. Thus, he can't really be placed in the upper half of the tier list. Pollywog Priest for me is another E tier hero. Unfortunately, Pollywog Priest doesn't really have a whole lot going for him. He doesn't lane very well. He doesn't push out creep waves very well. He doesn't rune control very well. He's very hard to flash farm with. He's great at locking one guy down and setting up solo kills and whatnot and being a ganker, but he has a hard time doing that, I feel like. And although he's great at pushing towers as well with his voodoo wards, a lot of the time you don't want to use it for that. You want to use it for killing heroes. And I feel like there are just many better heroes in the game than Pollywog Priest at the moment. Late game, he is really, really good, though. I mean, if you're able to be like Resto Stone Staff, Shrunken Head, Portal Keyed out with Post Haste, I mean, this hero is insane, but getting to that point is really hard because, as I said before, he doesn't really farm very well. He's kind of really dependent on snowballing, and it's kind of too hard for this hero to achieve that consistently. So, unfortunately, he is going to get the E tier for me. Soul Reaper. Soul Reaper for me is an we'll give him a C tier on the solo mid tier list here. Soul Reaper, he lanes very well. Whether he's against a ranged or a melee hero, he can constantly heal himself. He can rotate into jungle, flash farm with his heal. He constantly gets mana back when he kills creeps. He scales well as a semi-core. You can build him in all different ways. You can build him tanky, you can build him utility, disables, whatnot. There's so many different paths you can do with the Soul Reaper. But because he has a specific niche of being good against strength heroes or tanky heroes specifically, I have to give him the C tier. He's not really a hero for all situations. He's kind of niche in that sense. Doesn't really have an escape, so you can kind of repeatedly gank him in high tier games. Does have some weaknesses for sure, but he has definitely some strengths going for him. Fortunately, we don't really see Soul Reaper too much in competitive play, or really at all ran in solo mid. Typically, if we see him, he's in that more of like dual lane. Long lane is like a semi-core option, but there are a lot of heroes that do that role better in the game. Next on the list here is going to be Lord Salforis, and Lord Salforis for me is an S tier solo hero. So Lord Salforis kind of just does everything well throughout all stages of the game. He lanes really well. He's hard to box out of mid lane, whether you're a melee or a ranged hero. He has so much sustain with his spells. He can heal up. He can push out creep waves with his more Certissima. He can root control that way. He can rotate into jungle if he ever struggles and flash farm stacked jungle camps. He can kill 2 triple stacks at the same time. He can snowball in GPM so easily by just building tanky and sustain through mana and HP. And he scales throughout the game with his Undying. He can just make any hero in the game look like they are not tanky at all or difficult to deal with. This hero is just fantastic to have in so many situations. Hard counters a lot of heroes that are difficult to deal with in the game, and thus I have to give him an S tier rank. Next on the list is Pestilence. Pestilence for me, Pestilence is an E tier solo mid hero. So Pestilence, he doesn't really lane all that well. He can sometimes do well with his gore if he's able to get good bash procs, like if he's against another melee hero. But against ranged heroes, he just usually gets outlaned. His flight makes him take extra damage, so when he goes on you, a lot of the times it's easy to just turn around on him and man fight him because he's taking more damage than you are. So he doesn't really have a lot of burst because his ultimate and his stun, they don't really kill you. It's the auto attacks or the right clicks from him and his teammates that kill you. So there's a lot of counterplay involved with Pestilence. There's a lot of room for being able to turn on him. And there's just a lot of better initiators in the game than Pestilence. Pestilence is so specific to amplifying your team's physical damage. But other heroes in the game just kind of do what he does a little bit better, unfortunately. So because he doesn't really lane well, he doesn't farm very well. He's kind of this awkward ganker that takes more damage even though he's a tanky hero. He's just not all that great. He can work sometimes, and he can be effective when he's paired with heroes that just right click people down really fast, but as far as himself like scaling well or doing well in other facets, he's just kind of lackluster. So speaking of an initiator who is amazing, Pebbles is our next hero on the tier list, and I'm going to give Pebbles a B tier rank. So Pebbles for me, as far as how much I love Pebbles as a hero, Pebbles for me is an A or S tier hero by far, but as far as how he performs in his role of solo mid, I'm gonna give him a B tier because he doesn't necessarily win his lane or dominate like solo mid all that well. He's just what makes Pebbles a really good hero is that he's kind of easy to gank for, easy to set up ganks. He's great when paired with people. So like in competitive games, when you can dual lane this hero, he becomes really dominant. He can snowball and take over games, but that doesn't always align. A lot of the times there's too much riding on Pebbles' shoulders, and as far as like just his individual performance goes, there are a lot of heroes that can lane better than him, flash farm better than him, split push, initiate, whatnot. But he is a very scary hero. He's definitely in the upper half of the tier list for sure. But he's kind of on par for me with heroes like Midas and Bubbles, and thus I'm going to place him in the B tier. Next on our list is Elonia. Elonia is also a B tier solo mid hero. It's a little bit of a better laner than Pebbles. This hero can lane very well. She can spam spells, be a nuisance. She can rotate into the jungle and flash farm jungle camps very effectively. But throughout all stages of the game, she's really kind of this weak, squishy target that if you're able to jump her and catch her, she pretty much just dies. There's a lot of counterplay with this hero involved, and I feel like because she has, even though like her strengths are really high, her weaknesses are very weak as well. So she's got both ends of the spectrum. Really easy to shut down, but also really easy for her to excel and do well. So she has a lot going for her, but there are lots of ways to play against her as well. So I'm going to give her a B tier rank. Next on the list is Nitro. Nitro is an A tier solo mid hero. So kind of similar to Arachna, she has the orb effect, throwing out those shrapnels. Nitro is kind of just a better Arachna in my opinion. Kind of does what Arachna does, which is lane bully. She doesn't really have a farming mechanic just like Arachna. She has to lane dominate to do well. She scales kind of similarly. She's able to pick people off like one by one, but she has a stun with her, blanking on the name of the skill, but her second ability. So unlike Arachna, you cannot TP away from a Nitro. She's much more, not reliable, but she's more consistent with her ganks. She's more consistent with her scaling. And very, very difficult to deal with. A lot of the time you need to gank this hero over and over and kind of shut her down. So Nitro for me is an A tier hero. Only main weakness is obviously can't farm. Kind of like a semi carry, doesn't scale as a hard carry. Next on the list is Prisoner. Prisoner for me is a C tier mid hero. So Prisoner, kind of like a Riptide, lanes extremely well. He has high base damage. Very, very scary to lane against with his hook. So even if he has a hard time in the lane, he can always hook you into his tower. He can stop you from escaping with his shackle and his prison break, which deals lots of damage. But as the game progresses, that's kind of, so the laning phase is really his main strength and his ability to kind of pull you to him. But throughout the mid and late game, he kind of tapers off. You can buy Void Talisman against this hero, which counters him. You can buy armor. You can always hatchet and attack the shackle to kind of escape him if you're an escape hero that needs to get away. And Prisoner kind of needs to snowball and take over games. And even with like a Staff of the Master kind of making his prison break more effective or reliable, this hero kind of is just like a lane dominator and tapers off after mid game. Mid game is where he really, like early to mid game is where this hero really shines, and he needs to kind of win the game or secure the game for his team by that point. Next on the list we have Drunken Master, and Drunken Master is an A tier solo mid hero. This hero is incredibly powerful in 1v1 situations, really good against other melee heroes. When he hits level 6, he can kill pretty much any ranged hero without really having any items. He just does a lot of damage naturally, but he's great at kind of avoiding projectiles and jumping around and disjointing stuff. Good at room control with his high mobility, good against heavy CC with his drink charges. But this hero kind of lacks a farming mechanic. Sometimes he can get shut down. And if he doesn't have decent GPM, this hero doesn't really do a whole lot, even with just having damage from his ultimate. He can be kind of counterplayed because he only does physical damage. So armor, voids, everything are very, very good against him. Kind of needs to snowball to take over games. He can definitely do that because of how strong he is in the early laning stages. So I will give him an A tier rank. It's kind of like Adrenaline. If he wasn't nerfed in a previous patch, I think he probably would have been S tier. Same with Adrenaline. But after recent nerfs, both these two heroes have kind of toned down a bit. And thus I give them the A rank. Next is Monkey King. And Monkey King for me is another A tier solo mid hero. Monkey King, he does a lot of things really well, and he has few weaknesses. So Monkey King, he's very mobile. He can flash farm incredibly fast. Doesn't really need items because his ultimate gives him mana regen, so he can just naturally farm very fast. Kills jungle stacks with all his AoE abilities. Scales really well as a semi carry or even sometimes a hard carry. Generally, he's a semi carry. Great at rune control with his high mobility. Great at setting up ganks and just being all over the place on the map. But if you have lockdown for him and he's not able to jump around and be hard to click on and be annoying, he's sometimes easy to deal with. But more likely than not, he's generally doing what he wants to do, setting up ganks, flash farming, scaling well, just being an annoying hero to deal with. So he is an A tier solo hero. Next on the list is Balphagore, and Balphagore, one of my favorite heroes in the game. He is an S tier solo hero. Balphagore is just a monster, literally. This hero, he can take over games single-handedly, and he is really hard to kick out of the lane because even if he has a hard matchup against him, he can heal up with his corpse conversion. So he can just run over the corpses, heal back the health he lost from them harassing you. And it's really hard for him to get kicked out of lane. So he doesn't really get pushed out of lane. He doesn't really need many items to set up kills. As soon as he hits level 6, he can slow you, silence you, blow you up with the ultimate, and the creeps are running at you. He does so much damage. And all it takes is 1 death or 2 deaths, and all of a sudden your tower is dropping with the creeps. So the creeps just do so much. They're able to push the tower. If you're against a matchup where you can't rune control very well, you can just send the creeps to the rune. They're very fast. They can kill the rune and deny the other mid the rune. So he doesn't even need to rune control. He can just sit on the lane and sustain himself. Really, really hard hero to deal with. And when mid game comes around, you look up and all of a sudden you're 4 or 5 towers down and the other team has got a huge gold advantage. So Balphagore is really good at snowballing, pushing the advantage, and just being really difficult to deal with. So this hero definitely warrants an S tier rank from me. Next on the list is Warchief, and Warchief for me is a C tier solo mid hero. Warchief, he is a pretty good solo hero. He has a lot of mobility with his Spirit Walk. He can kind of creep kill decently with the totems, not really, but he's more of like a hero killer and team fighter with his Warsaw. I forget what it's called, the ultimate. But the main weakness of this hero is that you can purge the ultimate with like Sand Scepter, Nullfire Blade. So you pretty much need a Shrunken Head on Warchief if you want to build like gnomes and other like Sackstone, other sustain items to make him really tanky, heal a lot. He's kind of just like this mid-game nuisance style of hero. He's all over the place with Spirit Walks, dealing lots of damage. But there is a lot of counterplay with him. He's easy to shut down. He can be disabled relatively easily. So for me, as decent as he is of a laner and a hero killer, I have to give him a C tier rank. And lastly, I think on our list, I think this is the last hero we have, Bramble. For the solo mid and 1 versus 1 hero is going to be an E tier, unfortunately. Kind of closing off the tier list here on a unfortunate E tier rank with Bramble. So Bramble, unfortunately, I don't feel like he really has this great place in the game. His Vine Wall is very disruptive against heroes that want to escape, but after recent nerfs, the restraint only lasts for so many seconds. It's a lot easier to counterplay against Bramble now. Bramble, I think pre-nerf, he was definitely C tier or higher. But now he's a lot easier to deal with. You can counterplay this hero a lot nicer now. He's not this like I kill anything hero anymore. And he's pretty much just like this hero that's tanky and hard to kill. doesn't really, in my opinion, have too many things going for him. He doesn't really flash farm all that well. He ganks kind of okay, but he doesn't scale. Oh, well, I guess he kind of scales okay. You can buy staff on him and he can kind of right click, but he's not really a right clicker. So unfortunately for me, I feel like Bramble just doesn't have all that much going for him. I have to give him a E tier rank. So that is going to be all of the heroes in the game that I believe that their best role is solo mid or 1 versus 1. Going to be interested, as always, to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this tier list video, please remember to like the video. And if you have not already, please make sure to subscribe. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.